Today I'd like to give a synopsis of the 6 categories of affairs that we use at Affair Recovery. The first is a one-night stand. This is typically something that, in my opinion, happens one time. It's not an ongoing pattern. A lot of times it comes from loose boundaries. Impulsiveness will happen with alcohol being involved on a trip when someone's away, perhaps even at some sort of high school reunion. It's not about having a relationship really with that person. Let me stress that none of these categories are okay, because it's all about infidelity, the keeping of secrets, the incredible rupture that happens with infidelity. So I'm not saying this is all right, but in this sort of impulsive situation, someone does something they really shouldn't. It's really more about convenience or opportunity. In the vast majority of these situations, the person who strayed does not want to lose the marriage. That's one of their reasons for being scared to even bring it up, and there is no ongoing relationship. The second category that we talk about at Affair Recovery is fallen in love. That's really what we would call a limerent addiction or a limerent relationship, where somebody, I believe, actually has a strong infatuation for another person besides their mate. And in that situation, to me, it's very much like an addiction. There's an intense craving to be with that person. In this category, the limerent person believes they can never be as happy in the marriage as they are here. They feel like they've never felt this way before. They justify the affair typically frequently by saying, quote, they're in love. That makes it okay somehow. And the intense emotions generated by this type of affair can lead them to sacrifice life as they knew it. It's like the reasonable part of their brain has just completely turned off, and they'll stop pursuing things that were once important to them, because at this point they have such an intense craving to be with this other person that they kind of lose their mind. I would call this that, quote, love madness, where they're crazy love, where they're really not being rational, reasonable, but they are incredibly obsessed with that person. So that's category number 2. Category 3 is what we refer to as sexual addiction, where there's been a habitual pattern of extramarital sexual behaviors. Sometimes this person had these behaviors long before they came into the marriage, and they just continued throughout the marriage. They probably thought that those behaviors would stop once they got to the marriage. Or there are times that people have become addicted to things such as porn or other things through the years, even after the marriage, and it continues to be a problem. Typically, this person really would like to stay in the marriage, but has deep shame over what they're doing and has a lot of trouble beginning to address it. This is a compulsive behavior that's going to need help for them to address. If it's truly an addiction, they're probably not going to be able to just say, I won't do this anymore. In this category, they've got to address that particular problem. It's common for people with addictions to have worked really hard in the past to stop these behaviors, and even to have been successful to some extent for a season, only to have relapse come back over time. This category will include things such as chronic masturbation, pornography, topless clubs, prostitution, just ongoing sexual behaviors that have been progressively getting worse as time goes on, because that's one of the elements of an addiction. It's progressive. It does get worse over time. The fourth category is what we call wanting the marriage and the affair. And in this situation, you've got somebody who's committed to stay, they're committed to the marriage, but they're not committed not to stray. They actually want both. This person wants the benefits of having both the marriage and the affair partner. and somehow they feel entitled to be able to have that. Frequently, they have a high level of marital satisfaction, and their mate, a lot of times, will believe that they've had a great marriage and they've been a really good spouse. And so they're shocked completely when they find out that this sort of affair has been going on long term. This is a lot of times where there'll be a mistress, where somebody might, be taking care of somebody financially. And after discovery, typically the person in this situation will immediately drop the affair partner and choose their mate. The fifth category we call an emotional affair. And that's where the marital boundaries are violated by the wayward spouse, where they begin to share information and kind of look to somebody else to meet emotional needs versus their mate. Shirley Glass talks about this particular category in her book, Not Just Friends. She says that anytime someone says, we're just friends, when you put just in front of friend, it already indicates there's a problem with that relationship, because when it comes to marriage, it has to primarily be the two of you, and you don't have room for a third party that's sharing a lot of the intimacy, or where that person becomes more important even than the marriage. One of the problems with this sort of emotional affair is the emotional affair partner can see into the marriage, but the poor person within the marriage, they really don't even know what's going on with the other person that the person's emotionally, their mate's emotionally connected with. And so it will get to be where the wayward spouse is more protective of their friend than they are of their marriage. One of the ways that people will justify this category of affair, with the emotional affair, is they'll say, well, we're not sexual, we're just friends again. But something Peggy Vaughn said that I've always agreed with is that emotional affairs are just physical affairs that have yet to go physical. Given time, the importance of whatever they're getting from that emotional connection often will lead to that physical affair. And the sixth category that we use at affair recovery is love addiction. Now, love addiction is really about a need for affirmation and validation. And this person in this category is continually looking not just from one source, but from multiple sources for people to affirm, to validate, to let them know how special they are. Fearing deprivation, this person will compulsively pursue other relationships, getting involved, sometimes having even more than one sexual liaison at a time. In a way, they actually confuse love with neediness, physical and sexual attraction, and or the need to be rescued. So this person is continually looking for affirmation, looking to other person, afraid of what they won't have. And so they compulsively pursue multiple relationships. To me, it's a little different than the category 3, sexual addiction. The love addiction, while it is sexual in component, is very much about just continually getting that need met from that, or trying to get a need met from multiple relationships. So hopefully this wasn't too confusing, but I think to us, those categories all end up being important because they help lay out what sort of treatment plan is going to be needed. Somebody with a one-night stand obviously needs to work on boundaries and how to make sure this never happens again. Somebody dealing with a limit relationship ultimately has to learn who they are again and how to let go of this person and process releasing that so they can move forward in their marriage. Somebody with a sexual addiction is going to have to address the addiction and do something like SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous. Somebody who, ultimately has that category 4 affair where, they want the marriage and they want the affair. They have to begin to figure out what is going on and what sort of entitlement and how do they become more invested in their marriage, which is part of their treatment plan. Somebody with an emotional affair ultimately has to learn how to bring those emotions back into their marriage. And then part of that treatment plan is not only letting go of this, but reestablishing appropriate boundaries within the marriage and figuring out how to get that attachment back with their mate. And in that category 6, that love addiction, part of their treatment plan may be having to go to something like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. But each category probably needs something a little different in terms of where you want to focus in terms of just going forward. So hopefully you'll find this to be helpful to healing.